My name is Claire Devereaux, and I was 34 years old the morning I found out my family needed me. The same family that had sent me away at 17 with 2 garbage bags, a bus ticket to Harlan County, and a note that said I was better off with Aunt Paulette than with them. I was a paralegal at Whitmore and Shin Family Law in Clarksburg, West Virginia. I had been there 11 years. I knew what a quitclaim deed looked like before most people knew what equity meant. I knew how estates dissolved when families stopped talking, and I knew, better than I wanted to, how long a grudge could be kept alive in paperwork. The morning it started, I was already at my desk. It was 5:47 on a Wednesday morning in early October, and the office was empty except for me and the sound of the HVAC cycling on and off. I came in early because I liked the silence before the phone started. I had a cup of coffee going cold beside my keyboard and a manila envelope open in front of me. Not my case, just a filing I was cross-referencing for one of the partners. The envelope had been sitting in my bag for 3 days. I had not been able to look at what was inside it for reasons I had not yet let myself name out loud. The return address on the envelope was Morganfield, Kentucky. My mother's handwriting on the label. I had recognized it immediately, because she pressed hard enough with a ballpoint pen to leave grooves in the paper, and she still looped her lowercase either way she had when I was small enough to think her handwriting was beautiful. I set the envelope on the corner of my desk, and I did not open it. Not yet. Welcome back to channel_name, where the quietest moments are the ones that change everything. Writer flag, section 10. Welcome back lands at approximately word 311. Target is word 120 to 170. Act 1 requires restructuring to move this line earlier. Cannot fix inline. Return to Writer tab for Act 1 revision before publishing. I want to tell you about the 9 years between the day I left and the morning that envelope arrived. Because this story is not about what my family did to me. It is about what I did anyway. And there is a document inside that envelope, a single folded page I am going to show you before this is over, that proves the difference between those two things matters more than I ever understood. I am going to tell you everything, start to finish, the way it actually happened. Because the day my family sent me away, they made a decision without telling me all of it. And for 9 years, I carried the part they left out without knowing I was carrying it. The document will tell you the rest. I should explain what kind of 17-year-old I was, because it matters. I was not difficult. I was not in trouble at school, or running with the wrong people, or costing my parents money they did not have. I was the kind of teenager who made her own lunch, kept her room clean without being asked, and had already been accepted on an early admission scholarship to Marshall University's pre-law program, a scholarship that required a permanent home address to hold. That last part is important. I will come back to it. My mother, Diane Devereaux, had been with my stepfather Gerald since I was 11. Gerald Sutter was not a cruel man in the way people imagine when they hear that word. He did not raise his voice. He did not take things away from me or treat me badly in any obvious fashion. What Gerald did was quieter than that. He was the kind of man who believed that a family was a unit he had purchased the right to define, and I was a variable from a prior arrangement that did not fit his definition. He had 2 sons from his first marriage. They came every other weekend and occupied both spare bedrooms. When he and my mother bought the house on Sycamore Mill Road in Morganfield, there were 3 bedrooms. My mother told me I would have my own room. By the time they moved in, the room had become a home office for Gerald's accounting practice. I slept on a pullout in the basement for 14 months. The pullout in the basement had a bar through the middle of the mattress that left a mark on my back by morning. I learned to sleep on my side with a folded blanket between me and the bar, and after a while I stopped noticing it, which was its own kind of information. That is the structural reason, the way I eventually came to understand it. Gerald had reorganized the household around his son's comfort and his own professional image, and I was a disruption to both. My mother had been making smaller and smaller concessions to that reality for years before she made the final one. The night she told me, she sat on the edge of the pullout and she held my hand and she said that Aunt Paulette had a room for me in Harlan County and that it would be good for me to have some stability and that she thought it was for the best. She said it the way people say things they have been coached to say. She said it without meeting my eyes for longer than 2 seconds at a time. I did not cry in front of her. I remember that. I sat very still and I said I understood, and I did, Not the way she intended, but I understood the shape of what had happened. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the refrigerator running 2 floors above us. After a moment, my mother said, "You're going to have your own room there. Paulette has a proper room for you. With a window."
I did not say anything.
"She's good people," my mother said. "She'll take care of you." "I know who Aunt Paulette is," I said. "I know you do." She was still holding my hand, and she squeezed it once, lightly, the way you squeeze something you are about to set down. This isn't because of you, Claire. You know that." I looked at the pullout. I looked at the bar running through the center of the mattress. I thought about the room upstairs with a window that faced the yard, the one that was now Gerald's office, the one with the oak tree outside it that turned orange in October. "Will I come back?" I asked. "For holidays." She did not answer right away. "We'll figure that out," she said. That was not a yes. "Is Gerald making you do this?" I asked. "No one is making anyone do anything," she said, and her voice tightened slightly at the edges, the way it did when she was trying to keep something steady. "This is a family decision." I thought about pointing out that I was part of the family, and no one had asked me. I did not say it. I was 17, and I understood, with a clarity I could not have put into words then, that saying it would not change anything and would only make the next few weeks harder. "Okay," I said. She let go of my hand, and she stood up and she said she would help me pack tomorrow, and I said I could pack myself, and that was the last real conversation we had before I got on the bus. The anchor object is this. There was a cedar box on the floor beside the pullout. My grandmother on my father's side had given it to me when I was 9, the year before she died. It had a small brass latch, and it smelled like the inside of a closet that had not been opened in years, cedar and something faintly floral I could never name. Inside it, I kept my grandmother's reading glasses, a folded birthday card she had written me in her shaky handwriting, and a photograph of the two of us at her kitchen table in Pikeville. After my parents told me I was leaving, I opened that cedar box and I sat with it in my lap for a long time without taking anything out. I just held it. There is a kind of grief that does not announce itself. It settles in your chest and it waits. I took the box to Harlan County. I took it to the dormitory at Marshall when I deferred my scholarship for a year and then transferred it. I took it to my first apartment on Raleigh Street in Clarksburg. It sat on my desk at Whitmore and Shun in a corner where the partners who came into my office sometimes asked what was in it, and I always said family things, and that was true.
Now,
the document. When I was 17 and being sent to live with Aunt Paulette, my mother asked me to sign something. She said it was a formality, a consent form required because I was a minor and would be changing my legal residence to a different county. I signed it on the kitchen table in the house on Sycamore Mill Road. Gerald was not in the room. My mother folded the paper, put it in an envelope, and said she would take care of the rest. I forgot about it within a month. 9 years later, it would turn out that what I had signed was not a consent form. Aunt Paulette Devereaux was my father's older sister, and she was the best thing that happened to me in the worst year of my life. She lived on Cutter Branch Road in Harlan County in a house that smelled like coffee and wood smoke, and she had a spare room with a window that looked out over a creek that ran fast in spring and slowed to a whisper by August. She was a registered nurse at Harlan ARH Hospital. She worked 3 12-hour shifts a week and used the rest of her time with deliberate precision. She was the first adult I had ever watched build a life the way a craftsperson builds a piece of furniture, methodically, without waste, with attention to what would hold. For the first 6 months after I arrived, I helped Aunt Paulette with everything she needed without being asked. I cooked dinner 4 nights a week for 18 months so she could rest after her overnight shifts. I drove her grocery runs every Saturday morning for 2 years before I had a car of my own, borrowing her truck and leaving her a list on the counter of everything I had bought and what I had spent. I sat with her elderly neighbor, Mr. Vic Caprino, on Cutter Branch Road, 2 afternoons a week for 14 months, reading to him when his eyes got bad, so Paulette could use those hours to sleep. I kept her accounts. She ran a small bookkeeping side work for 3 local businesses, entered and reconciled every month for a full year, so she could drop one of her hospital shifts and breathe a little. I drove Aunt Paulette to her follow-up appointments at Harlan ARH for 6 months after her knee surgery in my second year there, so she would not have to arrange transport on overnight shift days. She never asked me to. I had put the appointment dates in the small calendar she kept on the kitchen counter, and on those mornings I had the truck warmed up and her coffee ready before she came downstairs. She paid my community college tuition for 2 semesters while I saved enough to transfer. I paid her back every dollar over 3 years. I deferred my Marshall scholarship for 1 year while I got my footing. Then I enrolled, commuted 3 hours round trip twice a week for 2 semesters, and graduated with honors in legal studies. I applied to Whitmore and Shun on the strength of one professor's recommendation letter and an interview in which I answered every question without notes. At Whitmore and Shun, I spent the first 3 years as a junior paralegal assisting on estate and family law cases, reading through documents other people signed without understanding them, organizing evidence, drafting correspondence, sitting across conference room tables from people who were in pain. I learned that grief and legal process move at different speeds, and that the gap between them is where most families come apart. I worked the weekend intake desk for 2 years straight, so the licensed staff could have Saturdays with their families. I took on pro bono estate cases for elderly clients who could not afford full representation, 3 cases in my 3rd year, 5 in my 4th, 7 by the time I was 30. I built a working knowledge of Kentucky and West Virginia estate law because half our clients had property in both states, and the crossing of those lines created complications that nobody else in the office wanted to untangle. I translated legal correspondence for 3 Spanish-speaking families at the Clarksburg Community Center on Saturday mornings for 1 full year, without billing, because they had no one else who understood what the document said. The cases were small, a landlord dispute, a wage issue, a contractor lien, but each one mattered to the family it belonged to, and I knew what it was like to need someone who would sit down and read the fine print with you instead of past you. I covered the Whitmore and Shinn front desk every Friday afternoon for 8 months when the receptionist was out on medical leave, fielding intake calls and logging every matter into the case management system before the partners arrived Monday morning.
None of the partners asked me to.
I did it because someone had to, and I was there. I made $31,400 my first year. I made $47,850 by my 4th.
I was not wealthy.
I was not comfortable in any cushion sense of the word. I was precise. I paid my rent on Raleigh Street on the 1st of every month for 9 years. I paid off my college debt in 6. I kept a savings account that I added to every month without exception, and by the time the envelope from Morganfield arrived on my desk that Wednesday, it held $14,200, not a fortune, but mine in a way that nothing given to me had ever quite been. I had not spoken to my mother in 9 years. Not because I was performing a silence for her benefit. I had simply built a life that did not have a door in it that led back to Sycamore Mill Road, and I had not felt the need to add one. The cedar box sat on the corner of my desk that morning, exactly where it always sat. The brass latch had developed a small dent sometime in the last few years. I could not remember when, and the cedar smell had faded to something fainter, closer to old wood than to the forest scent it had carried when I was 9. I had not opened it in 2 months. I opened it that morning, for no reason I could name, before I touched the envelope. I looked at my grandmother's glasses, sitting folded inside. I looked at the birthday card. I looked at the photograph. Then I picked up the envelope from Morganfield and I held it without opening it, and I listened to the HVAC cycle on and settle and go quiet. My chest felt the way a room feels before weather comes through, not quite still, not quite moving. I set the envelope back down. I picked up my coffee. I would open it in an hour, I told myself, when there was enough light coming through the window on Sycamore Street to see by. I waited. I opened the envelope at 7:14 that morning, when the first gray light came through the window on Sycamore Street and the office had begun to fill with the sound of the building waking up, the elevator running, someone's heels on the floor above me, the faint smell of the coffee cart in the lobby drifting up through the ventilation. Inside the envelope was a single folded document and a handwritten note from my mother on her usual stationery, cream paper with a small printed D in the upper left corner. I read the note first.
Claire,
I need you to call me. It is important. I would not ask if there was another way.
please, Mom.
7 words of explanation across 9 years of silence. I set the note aside, and I unfolded the document. It took me 40 seconds to understand what I was reading. Then I sat very still, and I read it again from the beginning. It was a deed of partial interest, dated 17 years prior, 2 years before my mother had married Gerald, before the house on Sycamore Mill Road, before any of it. My grandmother on my mother's side, Loretta Fay Marchand, had transferred a 25% interest in a parcel of land in Union County, Kentucky to my mother and to me jointly. My name was on it. My full legal name, correctly spelled, correctly formatted. I had been 15 years old when it was recorded. I had never been told. My hands were steady when I set the document down. My throat was not. Something had tightened there that made swallowing feel deliberate, like an action that required instruction. I sat with it for a long time. Then I picked up my phone, and I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, which told me she had been waiting.
Claire, she said.
I have the document, I said. A pause. Then, I was going to tell you. I did not answer that. There's been a situation with the estate, she said. Loretta's land. Gerald found a buyer last spring, a development company out of Evansville. The offer was significant. But the title search came back and your interest showed up and now the closing is frozen because we need your signature to proceed, and the buyer has a deadline of November 14th. I looked at the document on my desk. I looked at the cedar box in the corner. How long have you known my name was on the deed? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Your grandmother put you on it when you were small, she said. She didn't tell me the details until right before she passed. I was going to sort it out properly, Claire.
How long? I said.
The silence that followed had a texture to it. The kind that fills a room after a door closes. 17 years, she said quietly. I did not respond. I let that number sit in the air between us for long enough that she had to decide what to do with it on her own. I know how this looks, she said. Tell me about the closing, I said. She told me. The development company was called Meridian Land Partners. The purchase price was $2.3 million for the full parcel. My 25% interest entitled me to $575,000 at closing, less any agreed deductions, which Gerald had already structured in a preliminary term sheet she had not yet sent me. The November 14th deadline was firm. If the closing did not proceed by that date, Meridian would exercise a cancellation clause and the offer would be withdrawn. Who structured the term sheet? I said. Gerald worked with a title company, she said. What does the term sheet say about deductions? There was a pause. I'd have to have Gerald pull it. Send it to me, I said. Before we talk again. Claire. Send it to me, I said. All right, she said. I'll have him send it. What's the parcel? I said. How many acres? I'm not sure exactly. Gerald handles. Is there anything on the land? Structures? Some old farm buildings, she said. Nothing recent. It's been in Loretta's family since before I was born. Who else has an interest besides me and you? Just the two of us, she said. And Gerald as my spouse. He's listed on our joint property records. He's not on the deed, I said. No, she said carefully. He's not on the deed. So his interest in the sale comes through your 50%. A pause. That's right. I had been writing while she talked. I had a yellow legal pad open and I was writing names and percentages and dates in a column on the left side of the page. Is there anything encumbering the title? I asked. Any liens, any judgments against the parcel? The pause before her answer was longer than the others. Gerald says everything is clean, she said. That was not a direct answer to my question. Gerald thinks we should handle this as a family, she said. Gerald is not my family, I said. The pause this time was sharp. I could hear her breathing. That's not fair, she said. He has been nothing but. I was 17, I said. I signed a document you told me was a consent form. I had a scholarship with a permanent address requirement, and I lost it because I lost my address. I spent 4 years commuting to a university 6 hours round trip a week, so I could rebuild what I lost. I did all of that without any help from you or Gerald. And now you are calling me because you need my signature. We're calling you because you are family, she said, and her voice had shifted into something softer and more careful, the tone of someone who had rehearsed this part. Gerald and I both want to do right by you, Claire. That's why we're reaching out now instead of pursuing other options. I caught that last phrase. Instead of pursuing other options. I filed it. What other options? I said. Nothing, she said quickly. I just mean, we want to include you. We want to handle this together. I did not argue. I said I would think about it, and I would call her back within the week. She said she hoped I would not wait too long. She said the November deadline was real, and Gerald had already been in contact with the title company, and everything was ready to move. She said it the way people say things when they want you to feel the pressure of a clock, without them having to be the one who said it. The line clicked into silence, and I sat with it for a moment, not moving. I'll call you back, I said. Claire. I'll call you back. I ended the call. I put the phone face down on the desk. I picked up the document again and read it a third time, slowly, the way I had learned to read documents at Whitmore and Shin. Not for the meaning of individual words, but for the architecture of the whole thing, the way clauses related to one another, the way definitions set at the beginning shaped everything that came after. My interest was real. My name was correctly recorded. The deed had been filed with the Union County Clerk's office and had survived 17 years without challenge. I thought about my mother's voice when she said instead of pursuing other options. I opened my laptop and I pulled up the Kentucky Secretary of State Business Registry. I typed in Meridian Land Partners. The registration showed a principal office address in Evansville, Indiana, 2 managing members listed, and a registered agent in Louisville. Incorporated 14 months ago. 14 months. I typed Gerald Sutter into the related entity search. His name did not appear. I sat with that for a moment. Then I searched the Union County property records and pulled the parcel history. The land had been in the Marchand family since 1962. My grandmother had acquired it outright at my grandfather's death in 1988. The 2007 deed recording my interest and my mother's joint interest was the only recorded transfer. Then I found a second document I had not been looking for. A lien. Filed 8 months ago against the full parcel. Creditor listed as Sutter Holdings, LLC. Amount: $418,000. I sat back in my chair. The HVAC cycled on. The building hummed around me. I looked at the window, and I did not see the street outside it. Gerald had loaned money against a property he did not fully own, using an interest he had no legal right to encumber, without notifying the co-owner whose name was on the deed. My name. The development sale was not just an opportunity. It was an exit. Gerald needed the closing to proceed so the lien could be retired before the title company's underwriter flagged it as defective and the whole transaction collapsed. Without my signature, the sale froze. If the sale froze, the lien sat exposed. If the lien sat exposed, the underwriter would flag it, Meridian would pull out, and Gerald's $418,000 debt would have nowhere to go.
That was what other options meant.
I thought about my mother sitting somewhere in the house on Sycamore Mill Road, holding her phone, waiting for me to call back. I thought about what it had cost her to make that first call, not emotionally, but strategically, and I thought about the way she had said, "We want to do right by you," Claire, in the voice she used when she was reading from a script someone else had written. I thought about the night she sat on the edge of the pullout in the basement and held my hand and told me it was for the best. My jaw tightened. I did not move. I breathed out slowly, and I let my hands rest flat on the desk, and I looked at the document my grandmother had filed 17 years ago, the one with my name on it, my full legal name, the one nobody had ever told me about, and I thought about what my grandmother had known when she signed it that my mother had not. She had known that things change, that families reorganize themselves around power and convenience, and that the people with the least leverage get moved to the outside. She had put my name on a piece of land, so that when that happened, not if, when, I would have something that could not be reorganized away from me. She had been right. She had just been 17 years early. I picked up the document, and I held it the way I had learned to hold things that mattered, not tightly, not loosely, but with exactly the grip required to keep it safe. My eyes burned once, briefly. I did not blink it away. I just let it pass through and settle. Then I opened a new document on my laptop, and I began to type. I called the Union County Clerk's office at 8:03 that morning and requested a certified copy of the 2007 deed. I called the Kentucky Bar Association referral line and asked for an estate attorney licensed in both Kentucky and Indiana. I wrote down two names. I called the first one and left a message. I looked up Sutter Holdings LLC in the Indiana Secretary of State Registry. I printed the lien document from the Union County Records portal. I opened the cedar box and I looked at my grandmother's photograph for a long moment. I closed the lid. I picked up the folded deed from my grandmother and I set it inside the box beside the photograph. I closed the lid again. I sat with my hands in my lap and I listened to the building around me, and I did not move. The estate attorney called me back at 11:20 that same morning. Her name was Patricia Owl, and she had a practice in Madisonville that handled property disputes across the Kentucky-Indiana line. I told her what I had. I told her about the deed, the lien, the development sale, the November deadline, and the phone call from my mother. I read her the lien amount and the creditor name and the date of filing. I told her about Meridian Land Partners and the 14-month incorporation date. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. "You're a paralegal?" she said. 11 years, I said. "Then you already know what this is," she said. "I want to hear it from an attorney," I said. "What this is," she said carefully, "is a party attempting to use a co-owner's signature to retire a debt encumbering an interest they had no authority to pledge. The lien is defective on its face. Any competent title underwriter will catch it. The question is whether they catch it before or after your signature is on the deed of conveyance." "Before," I said. "I want it caught before." "Then don't sign anything," she said.
Not yet.
"Let me pull the full chain of title, and I'll call you back by end of week." "What about the November 14th deadline?"
I said.
"Let it run," she said. "Don't sign anything to meet it. My mother's going to push." "I expect she will," Patricia said. "That's a feature of the situation, not a complication. The pressure is coming from someone with a defective instrument who needs your cooperation to retire it. The pressure has a source. If Meridian cancels, what does that do to Gerald's lien?" "It leaves it exposed," she said. "The parcel stays encumbered. Gerald's debt has no exit. He would need to find another buyer willing to proceed with a title cloud, which is not an easy ask, or he would need to discharge the lien voluntarily." "Under what circumstances would he discharge it voluntarily?" "Under circumstances where the alternative is worse," Patricia said. "Which is what I intend to make clear to him." I thanked her. I ended the call. I looked at the cedar box on the corner of my desk, and I thought about what my grandmother had known when she was alive that I was only now beginning to fully see. Patricia called me back on Friday afternoon with a title report, a legal opinion, and a recommendation. The lien was defective. My interest had never been encumbered because Gerald Sutter had no authority to pledge it. The lien would need to be discharged before any sale could close. The discharge would require either Gerald's voluntary release or a court order. Patricia said she could file for the court order within 2 weeks if it came to that. "What does that do to the November deadline?" I asked. "It probably kills it," she said. "Meridian's cancellation clause is tight. If the title isn't clean by November 14th, they're out." "Good," I said. There was a pause. "You don't want the sale to proceed?" she said. "I want the sale to proceed on terms that reflect what the deed actually says," I said. "My grandmother put my name on that property 17 years ago. I would like to be present at the table this time." Patricia Owl said she understood completely. My mother called me 3 more times that week. I let the first 2 go to voicemail. The third time I picked up. "Claire, the deadline is in 3 weeks," she said. "We need to move forward." "I know about the lien," I said. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. I could hear her breathing change, a small, sharp intake, then a long, controlled exhale, the sound of a person recalibrating. "That's a business matter," she said finally. "It doesn't affect your interest." "It encumbers the title," I said. "It absolutely affects my interest." "Gerald says it can be resolved at closing out of his proceeds," she said, and there it was, the rehearsed answer, the line she had been given to deliver. "It's a technicality. It's a defective lien on a property he had no right to pledge," I said. "That is not a technicality." "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said, and her voice had shifted again, softer now, edged with something that wanted to sound like hurt. "We are trying to include you, Claire. We reached out to you. We didn't have to do that." I did not answer right away. I let that sentence stand on its own for a moment. We didn't have to do that. You needed my signature, I said. That's why you reached out. That is not, she started. It's all right, I said. I'm not angry. I just want you to understand what I know. She was quiet. I'm going to ask you something, I said, and I want you to answer it honestly. Did you know about the lien when you sent me the envelope? The pause before her answer was 4 seconds. I counted. Gerald handles the financial side, she said. That was not a no. We met in person 2 weeks later at Patricia Owl's office in Madisonville. My mother and Gerald drove up from Morganfield. I drove down from Clarksburg the night before and stayed in a motel off the highway so I would not be tired when I walked in. Gerald Sutter in person was exactly as I remembered him, compact, careful, wearing a pressed shirt and the expression of a man who expected to be given what he asked for. He shook Patricia's hand firmly. He did not offer to shake mine. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair had more gray in it. She was wearing a blouse I did not recognize, and she held her purse in her lap with both hands when she sat down, the way a person holds something when they are not sure what to do with their hands. Patricia laid out the situation clearly and without editorializing. The lien, the defective pledge, the title opinion, the options available to all parties. She was calm and precise, and she did not raise her voice once, which I appreciated. Gerald listened with his hands folded on the table. When Patricia finished, he said, "We thought it would be better for everyone if we handled this internally before bringing in outside counsel." Patricia said, "That time has passed."
Gerald looked at me.
"Claire, we are trying to do right by you here.
We reached out to you.
We didn't have to do that. A 25% share on a $2.3 million sale is more than fair. That's your grandmother's wish being honored." I looked at him. My chest was steady. My hands were flat on the table. "Patricia," I said, "can you pass me the cedar box, please?" Patricia slid it across the table from the chair beside her, where I had set it when I came in. I reached into the box, reached Anderson, past my grandmother's reading glasses and the birthday card, and I took out the folded deed, take under Scott, the one Patricia had pulled from the Union County records as a certified copy, the one with both my name and my mother's name typed clearly in the grantee line, dated 2007, signed by Loretta Faye Marchand in her unsteady hand, and I unfolded it slowly. Unfold_slow. One panel, then the second, then the third, and I laid it flat on the table between us. Lay_flat, so that everyone in the room could see it. Gerald looked at it. My mother looked at it. Neither of them spoke. "This is the document your grandmother filed," Patricia said to my mother, though she was watching Gerald. "Recorded with the Union County Clerk on March 9, 2007. Claire was 15 years old. My mother's throat moved. She looked at the deed, and then she looked at me, and something in her face shifted. Not guilt exactly, but the expression of a person who has been holding a door closed for a long time and has just felt the latch give. Gerald said, "The lien is a bridge instrument. It was always intended to be retired at closing. This is standard practice in—" "Gerald," I said. Silence, insert D, he stopped. The room held. I looked at him with exactly the amount of attention the moment required. "You said we are trying to do right by me," I said. "You said that." He nodded, carefully. "You said you didn't have to reach out to me," I said. "You said that too." He said nothing. "And you said a 25% share is more than fair, that it's my grandmother's wish being honored." I let that last phrase sit on the table beside the deed. "My grandmother's wish," I said, "was recorded 17 years ago with my name on it. It survived without your help for 17 years. What did not survive, Gerald, was the part where you were going to tell me about it." He opened his mouth. "I'm picking up these papers now," I said. I folded the deed, slowly, the same 3 panels, the same order I had unfolded it, and I placed it back inside the cedar box, and I closed the lid with the small brass latch, and I set the box on the table beside my hand. I did not raise my voice. I did not look away from him. I did not slam anything. I just picked up my copy of Patricia's title opinion, set it on top of the cedar box, and I stood up. My mother said, "Claire, Patricia will be in touch with the terms," I said. I walked out of the conference room, and I pulled the door closed behind me with the gentlest possible click. The lien was discharged 6 weeks later under a negotiated agreement that Patricia structured with Gerald's attorney. Gerald released the claim voluntarily once it became clear that a court filing would make the defective pledge a matter of public record in Union County, which would have consequences for his accounting practice that went beyond this transaction alone. Meridian Land Partners' November deadline passed. The sale did not close. In January, Meridian returned with a revised offer. The parcel had been reassessed and the new figure came in at $2.1 million, slightly lower than the original, which Gerald's attorney tried to attribute to the delay. Patricia pointed out that the delay had been caused by the defective lien and declined to engage further on that point. The closing happened on a Thursday in late February. I signed my portion of the documents at Patricia's office in the morning. My check, $525,000 after agreed closing costs, was deposited into my account by 4 o'clock that afternoon. I sat in my car in the parking lot outside Patricia's office for a few minutes before I drove back to Clarksburg. It was cold. The heater was running, and the windows were fogging slightly at the edges. I had the cedar box on the passenger seat because I had brought it with me the way I brought it everywhere that mattered. I opened it. I took out the photograph of my grandmother and me at her kitchen table in Pikeville. She was laughing at something in the picture. I could never remember what, and I was 8 years old and leaning into her arm and also laughing, my face tipped up toward hers. I held the photograph for a long time. She had known. She had put my name on a piece of land and filed it with the county clerk and said nothing, because sometimes the most protective thing a person can do is act quietly and trust that the paperwork will outlast the chaos. It had. I put the photograph back. I closed the box. I set it on the passenger seat, and I drove home. My mother called me in March. Not about the estate, that was finished. She called on a Sunday afternoon, and when I answered, she did not say anything for a moment, and then she said, "I'm sorry, Claire. I know that's not enough. I just wanted to say it." I did not tell her it was fine. It was not fine, and she knew that, and I thought she needed me not to make it easy. "I hear you," I said. Is there a way forward?" she asked. I thought about it honestly, the way I had learned to think about things at Whitmore and Shen, not wishfully but accurately, with attention to what was actually there. "I don't know yet," I said. "But I'm not saying no." She said that was more than she had hoped for. I believed her. What I know now that I did not know at 17 is this: the people who build quietly are not invisible. They are just operating on a longer timeline than the people who are trying to manage them. My grandmother understood that. She put her faith in a piece of paper and a county clerk's filing stamp and 30 years of compounding patience, and she was right. That is my story. I carried a cedar box across 9 years and 3 addresses. I signed a document at 17 that I did not understand, and when I finally read it at 34, it had my name on it in a way nobody could take back. I walked out of a conference room in Madisonville on a Tuesday afternoon without raising my voice, and 6 weeks later the thing that had been used to keep me out became the thing that let me back in, on my terms, with my name on the line that mattered. If you are in the middle of a long quiet, and you are starting to wonder whether any of it is adding up, take this as your sign. It is adding up. It is being recorded somewhere, the way a deed gets recorded, in a language that does not require anyone else to acknowledge it to be real. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment. I read every one of them. Hit subscribe if you want to hear what comes next. I'll see you in the next one.